There's something unbelievable about watching Kelsey Grammer walk onto the set of Frasier in 19... On camera, he looked like the sharpest mind in Seattle, a radio psychiatrist who always had the answers, but off camera, he was a man living through storms most people wouldn't survive. And that's what makes this story more disturbing, more poetic, and far more human than fans ever realized. When the world met Frasier Crane on Cheers, nobody expected him to become one of television's most iconic characters. But by the time Frasier launched, Crane wasn't just a character, he was a mirror Kelsey Grammer used to hold himself together. Millions saw the witty monologues, the refined sarcasm, the therapist who solved other people's crises. Almost no one knew that the man delivering those lines was often walking onto the stage after surviving another personal catastrophe. This contradiction, brilliance on screen, chaos off screen, is the tension that shaped the entire show's tone. The early 90s were full of sitcoms built on jokes, but Frasier was different. The writing was crisp, theatrical, almost surgical, and Kelsey brought something no script could teach: emotional truth. He performed each episode with the precision of a Shakespearean actor, because that's what he trained to be. But what made people stay wasn't the performance, it was the energy behind it. You could feel something deeper, something unresolved, something almost haunting. That emotional weight came from real places: the losses he faced, the battles he hid, the desperate attempt to create stability in front of millions while struggling privately. His colleagues often said he brought a strange mixture of elegance and vulnerability, as if Frasier Crane wasn't a character but a version of Kelsey trying to exist. This dual life, polished genius on-screen, fragile human off-screen, made viewers connect with him in a way sitcoms rarely achieve. When he delivered lines about loneliness, perfectionism, or the search for meaning, it didn't feel scripted, it felt lived. And this authenticity helped define Frasier's unique emotional texture: sophisticated, yes, but always tinged with something quietly aching. Behind every joke, there was a hint of a man trying to rebuild himself. But here's the part most people miss: Kelsey Grammer didn't just play a brilliant brother, he worked alongside one. And the next cast member didn't simply support the show, he elevated it so much that some critics argue he, not Kelsey, was the real spine of the series. Before David Hyde Pierce ever spoke a single line as Niles Crane, the Frasier team already sensed something unusual, a kind of precision that didn't feel comedic but surgical. And when he walked onto the set for the first time, Kelsey Grammer reportedly stared for a moment longer than expected. It wasn't just that Pierce looked like he could actually be Frasier's brother, it was the way he carried himself, the way he held silence, the way he let a raised eyebrow do more storytelling than most actors could do in a paragraph. From that very first moment, something shifted. The show gained a heartbeat it didn't even know it needed. Pierce was not supposed to be the show's lightning bolt. Originally, Niles didn't even exist on paper. But writers were so struck by Pierce's audition and his almost eerie resemblance to Kelsey that they built a character around him. And that spontaneous decision changed the entire series. Because what David brought wasn't typical TV acting. It was controlled chaos, high art physical comedy, and emotional layering so fine it bordered on obsessive. Where Frasier was thunder, Niles was a scalpel, sharp, precise, and devastatingly effective. His genius wasn't loud, it was disciplined. He made silence funny, he made stillness emotional, and he made neurosis feel elegant. When Niles walked into Cafe Nervosa and froze mid-step because his latte foam wasn't symmetrical, it was absurd, but Pierce played it with the commitment of a man performing Shakespeare. Not exaggerated, not cartoonish, but truthfully neurotic, authentic in a way that made even the most ridiculous moments feel strangely relatable. Audiences didn't just laugh at Niles, they saw themselves in him. The perfectionism, the insecurity, the longing to be seen by someone who doesn't notice you. But here's the part that still surprises fans. Behind that polished performance was a man who faced fame almost reluctantly. He didn't like attention. He didn't chase the spotlight. While other actors dream of being recognizable in public, Pierce wanted anonymity. He treated acting not like a craft, but like a responsibility, something he must execute flawlessly, then quietly step away from. That purity, that humility, that monk-like devotion to detail, it's what made him unstoppable. And ironically, the man who never sought fame became the show's secret weapon. By season 3, critics were already whispering what Kelsey himself admitted years later. There were days Pierce was so good, so disturbingly perfect, that even the lead felt the gravitational pull of his performance. Not competition, elevation. Their chemistry created something rare on television. Two actors pushing each other, not to outperform, but to refine, to sharpen, to reach a comedic precision most sitcoms never come close to touching. And every fan could feel it, that electric tension between two brothers who loved each other, envied each other, annoyed each other, admired each other. But the real shock comes next. While Niles Crane was becoming a cultural icon, the man playing Frasier's father, the grounding force of the show, was quietly carrying a personal story that almost never makes it into nostalgia videos. A story far more complex, far more human, and far more emotionally loaded than most viewers ever realized. There's a moment every Frasier fan remembers: Martin Crane entering the apartment with that old, ugly plaid recliner. A chair so stubbornly unfashionable it practically offended the decor. But here's the secret. That chair wasn't just a prop. It was a metaphor for the man who played him. John Mahoney was the grounding force on a show filled with high-intellect characters, yet his real life held a depth and quiet resilience far more compelling than any sitcom storyline. Mahoney didn't come into Hollywood through glamour or connections. He wasn't groomed for fame. He wasn't raised for the spotlight. He earned every inch of his career, late, quietly, and after living through storms that would have swallowed most people. His past wasn't the kind you put in glossy biographies. It was filled with challenges, reinventions, and a lifelong search for belonging. And that's exactly why Martin Crane felt so real. He wasn't acted, he was lived. While Kelsey Grammer and Hyde Pierce played characters who analyzed everything, Mahoney understood life from the opposite angle: simplicity, instinct, human warmth. When he delivered lines about family, regret, pride, or sacrifice, they hit with a force that felt strangely familiar, like something your own father might say when no one else is in the room. Mahoney brought a different energy to the set. Where others rehearsed endlessly, he listened, observed, absorbed. He didn't try to steal scenes, he anchored them. His timing wasn't loud or flashy, it was honest. And honesty, especially in sitcoms, is rare. Critics often say he provided the heart of the show, but the truth is sharper. He provided the humanity that made the brilliance of the Crane brothers possible in the first place. Without that emotional counterweight, Frasier would have floated too high, too intellectual, too disconnected. And yet, even though he delivered one of the most quietly powerful performances in sitcom history, Mahoney never carried himself like a TV star. Off-screen, he kept his life private, almost guarded. Fame didn't change him. Interviews didn't pull him in. He preferred authenticity over attention. His co-stars often described him as gentle, loyal, deeply kind, the kind of person who would celebrate others before celebrating himself. And in a cast full of perfectionists, Mahoney was the one who reminded everyone that the magic of the show wasn't just timing or writing, it was connection, real human connection. Here's the part that most viewers never see. While Martin Crane represented old-school simplicity on screen, John Mahoney was fighting personal battles that stayed mostly hidden from the public. And yet, through every season, he delivered a performance that felt grounding, fatherly, and profoundly human, the emotional glue holding two brilliant brothers together. But the story doesn't end there, because while Mahoney grounded the show, there was another cast member who made Frasier sparkle, a character whose arrival turned sibling rivalry and father-son tension into a new dimension of humor, chaos, and emotional charm. A character whose entire arc revolved around destiny, intuition, and a kind of sweetness that changed the show's rhythm. When Jane Leeves first walked onto the set of Frasier, something subtle, almost invisible, shifted in the air. The show already had intellectual firepower. It had emotional weight. It had the perfect comedic triangle with Frasier, Niles, and Martin. But what it didn't have yet was warmth. Not the polite kind, the disruptive kind. The kind that enters your home, moves the furniture, and somehow makes the space feel more alive. Daphne Moon did exactly that. And Jane Leeves made Daphne more unforgettable than anyone expected. She wasn't hired to be the comedic centerpiece. She wasn't brought in to compete with the Crane brothers' brilliance. She was supposed to be the grounding presence, quirky, optimistic, a little eccentric, but something extraordinary happened. Leeves added layers the script didn't ask for. She played Daphne with an intuitive understanding of people, the kind of emotional intelligence that made viewers feel not just entertained, but understood. Her accent, her timing, her unpredictability, they weren't caricatures. They were deliberate choices. She understood that Daphne wasn't supposed to be the funny housekeeper. She was the emotional mediator between three men who were either too stubborn, too intellectual, or too proud to admit they needed someone to soften their edges. Every moment she walked into the scene, the temperature changed, the rhythm changed, the emotional oxygen changed. But here's what made Leeves exceptional. She resisted the temptation to turn Daphne into a stereotype. She gave her dignity, compassion, a strange wisdom that slipped out between jokes. When she spoke about love, family, intuition, destiny, it felt like the show paused for a second, grounding itself in a truth that comedy alone could never reach. She made eccentricity feel soulful, and then came the storyline that defined her legacy, Niles and Daphne, a slow-burn romance that broke every sitcom rule. It shouldn't have worked. It worked because Leeves played Daphne as someone genuinely worth loving, not idealized, not flawless, but human in the most disarming way. When Niles stared at her with reverence, audiences understood why. When Daphne finally saw him, really saw him, it felt earned. Behind the scenes, Leeves carried herself with the same balance she showed on screen. Professional, prepared, but deeply connected to her castmates. She was the person who kept the set warm, steady, light, even when storylines grew intense or schedules grew exhausting. The directors often said she had a gravity no one noticed until it was gone. But here's the twist fans rarely talk about. While Daphne brought harmony, Roz brought the fire, and Frasier needed fire, because behind all the sophistication, there was one character who spoke with absolute authenticity, refused to sugarcoat anything, and added a grounded wit that made the entire world of the show feel real, not idealistic. And the actress behind her, a woman with more resilience and sharper instincts than most people realize. If Frasier had a pressure valve, someone who cut through the intellectual haze, the pretentious debates, and the Crane brothers' endless overthinking, it was Roz Doyle. And the woman behind Roz, Peri Gilpin, didn't just play the role. She grounded the entire show in a way most fans underestimate. Roz wasn't polished like Frasier, neurotic like Niles, mystical like Daphne, or traditional like Martin. She was real, and Peri Gilpin made real feel electrifying. From her very first scene, she carried a kind of emotional directness that sitcoms rarely allow their female characters. She was confident without being cold, smart without being sanctimonious, vulnerable without being weak. Roz didn't perform femininity the way sitcoms in the 90s often demanded. She lived it, honestly, unapologetically, and Peri brought that honesty with such clarity that it changed the way the show moved. What made Gilpin's performance extraordinary wasn't volume or big comedic moments, it was her restraint. She had that rare ability to say a line with a look, a sigh, a micro-smirk, and suddenly the entire tone of the scene shifted. She was the truth teller in a room full of people avoiding the truth. Her dynamic with Frasier was especially powerful. They weren't lovers, they weren't rivals, they weren't siblings. They were something harder to define, two flawed adults trying to navigate life with a mix of dysfunction and sincerity. Roz challenged Frasier. She humbled him. Sometimes she protected him. Sometimes she dragged him back to reality. And every time she did, audiences felt that tiny shock of recognition, because everyone has or needs a Roz in their life. What most viewers don't know is that Peri approached Roz with a level of emotional intelligence rooted in her own life experiences. She understood heartbreak. She understood rebuilding. She understood what it meant to be underestimated. And that subtle defiance shaped Roz's entire persona. That's why Roz's confidence never felt forced. It came from a place of survival, not performance. And off camera, Gilpin was the glue you don't see but always feel. She was the cast member who checked in, who listened, who made the long shooting days feel human. The kind of presence that doesn't seek attention but strengthens everyone around her. In a cast filled with giants of timing and technique, she held her own with calm force, something fans sensed even if they couldn't articulate it. But here's the twist that ties everything together. While Roz was the show's authenticity, Peri was also part of the emotional architecture that made Frasier more than a sitcom. She was a cornerstone, and cornerstones by definition hold everything else upright. And that leads us to the final truth, the part most retrospectives gloss over. Frasier wasn't just a cast, a set, or a collection of scripts. It was a cultural shift. The show didn't just entertain, it reshaped what audiences expected from comedy, from character depth, from television itself. There's a reason Frasier doesn't feel like any other sitcom from the 90s. It didn't shout to get attention. It didn't chase trends. It didn't rely on cheap gags. Instead, it did something quietly revolutionary. It treated comedy like literature, and now decades later, its legacy feels almost surreal. How did a show about two pretentious brothers, an aging father, a quirky caretaker, and a straight-talking producer become one of the most influential series in television history? The truth is simple, but not obvious. Frasier wasn't built to make noise. It was built to make meaning. Every character carried emotional weight. Every joke hit a human truth. Every episode balanced elegance with vulnerability, and that's why the show didn't fade with time. It aged into something stronger. Most sitcoms from the era feel dated, cramped inside their punchlines. Frasier feels like it's still breathing. Rewatch it today and the dialogue still hits, the timing still cuts, The emotional themes, loneliness, belonging, reinvention, identity, feel more relevant in 2025 than they did in 1995. It's as if the show predicted how disconnected modern life would become and offered a strange kind of comfort long before social media turned everything into noise. But the secret weapon of Frasier's legacy wasn't just its writing or performances, it was its psychology. The show understood people deeply. Frasier and Niles weren't caricatures of intellectualism, they were portraits of insecurity hidden behind refinement. Martin wasn't a cliché father, he was a symbol of unspoken love and intergenerational tension. Daphne wasn't just quirky, she embodied intuition and emotional literacy. Roz wasn't comedic relief, she was adult honesty wrapped in warmth. Every character represented a different way people cope with life, and yet, the most unbelievable part of its legacy is this: the show never needed explosive twists, dramatic deaths, or shocking cliffhangers to stay relevant. Instead, it relied on what modern content creators struggle with the most: emotional precision. The ability to say something meaningful with nothing more than a raised eyebrow, a half smile, a broken latte, or a brother's subtle sigh. That restraint is what made the show powerful. And ironically, it's what makes new audiences, Gen Z, new immigrants, late-night scrollers, nostalgia hunters, fall into the show today with the same intensity audiences did in the 90s. It feels safe, but not simple, smart, but not snobbish, emotional, but never sentimental. And here's the final twist: Frasier didn't just survive the decades, it outlived its own era. It became a blueprint. Today's prestige comedies, the ones praised for depth and intelligence, borrow from Frasier's DNA whether they admit it or not. Character-driven storytelling, emotional subtlety, intellectual humor without pretension, imperfect people trying, failing, and trying again. But maybe the most haunting truth is this: the show's world was always a bit unrealistic. The perfect apartments, the polished dialogue, the slow-burn romances. Yet somehow, that unreal perfection made people feel more understood than shows rooted in realism, because Frasier wasn't about reality, it was about humanity. And that's why when the last episode aired in 2004, with Frasier choosing uncertainty, choosing life, choosing possibility, audiences didn't just say goodbye to a sitcom, they said goodbye to a companion, a mirror, a comfort, a lesson disguised as laughter. But don't close the book yet, because the story of Frasier isn't over, far from it. The show left behind questions, themes, and emotional fingerprints that still echo today. And if you think this story was unforgettable, wait until you see what happened behind the scenes of the next series we're covering. The one with scandals, secrets, and a legacy even more complicated than Frasier's polished Seattle skyline. Your next obsession is waiting.